Hello, I'm Doug Smith, and welcome to the 28 September 2012 edition of Portsmouth This Week, the voice of Portsmouth Town Hall. With me this morning, my guest is Gary Crosby, town planner, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the zoning process, which before I chatted with him earlier this morning, I thought was pretty straightforward, but it turns out it isn't. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you very much. I have the title of my little talk here is 15 minutes about zoning. It's more like 15 hours about zoning, but we'll try and get through it quickly. Thanks for having me. I think there's a lot of misconception about what zoning is, what it is not, and I welcome the opportunity to try and put some information out there about it. Zoning basically is, in its simplest terms, is a practice of dividing the community up into zones or districts and then providing regulations for the use of land within those districts. There's a long, deep history of zoning in the United States. The first opportunity that the Supreme Court had to validate zoning was in 1926, a very famous case, Euclid versus Ambler, and it basically revolves around the what's called the police power, which is promoting the protection of the health, safety, and welfare of the community. You find that phrase everywhere in municipal, federal, state governments, the exercise of the police power. Now, and when the courts are reviewing zoning regulations, that basically the question that they want to ask is whether this particular regulation is a valid use of the police, a valid exercise of the police power. Is it arbitrary and capricious? Is it a valid use of that? Obviously, zoning has a lot to do with regulating private land, and so the zoning, in order for it to be legally valid, for example, you can't just put in a zoning or regulation that says that excludes all low-income people. There's been cases about that. You can't put in a zoning regulation which removes all beneficial use of a piece of property. It's not. It would be arbitrary and capricious.
Okay,
and
let me just ask a question, if I might.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, in Portsmouth, then, what you're saying is zoning is the process of deciding what can go on what properties in town.
That's right.
I guess my question would be: so, when was this originally done, and how has it changed? I mean, do we review this every once in a while?
Our zoning ordinance is the grandchild of federal enabling legislation and the child of the state's Zoning Enabling Act of 1991. Our zoning ordinance, in many cases, is word for word from this state enabling act. It is reviewed from time to time. And I'll talk about it a little bit later, but basically the zoning ordinance has to be in compliance with the comprehensive plan. And so it periodically, over time, what happens is that you have your comprehensive plan, you have your zoning ordinance, and zoning changes take place, and the two diverge from each other in compatibility over time. And what they have to be brought back together from time to time. And this is going to happen with our review of the updating of the comprehensive plan. But zoning regulates land in three ways. It regulates use, which is what goes where, and that it regulates intensity, which is lot size, density, floor. In the case of commercial, it's floor area ratio, the size of a building compared to the size of the property. So. And then dimensional regulations, which are setbacks, lot frontage, building height, and things like that. So in those three ways, zoning regulates the use of land. There are two components to the zoning ordinance, and one can't exist without the other. There is the zoning ordinance itself, which is the regulations for the regulate use of the property, and the other is the zoning map. The zoning map is what goes where, and the zoning ordinance is describes what can be done in that
and that provides
district.
a legal basis for the map.
Exactly,
okay.
Exactly. You can't have one without the other. The zoning map, we have it. I have copies of it, obviously, in my office and across the hall in George's office, and people can come in at any time and see the map. And that's the simplicity. That's the beauty of the beauty of zoning ordinance is in its simplicity. You come in and you look at a map and you figure out where you are, and then you open up the zoning ordinance and you figure out what you can do with where you are.
And, you know, in theory, it sounds simple. But I'm sure it gets very difficult as things change in neighborhoods. But I guess one of the things I'm trying to come to grips with is, at some point, some group of people in Portsmouth went out and drew and put in the categories on these maps.
Yes.
Based on something.
Yes.
And then presumably once they did all this to all the town, then these things were brought forward to the town council for approval. Is that how it works?
Yep. The town council is there are several organizations that are involved, pieces of the government that are involved in the zoning process. The town council is the zoning board. They are responsible for adopting and amending the zoning ordinance. When you see a case, for example, the request for the change of zoning over there at Headley Street, they were requesting a change in the zoning of that piece of property, which is an amendment to the zoning ordinance, and so they end up in front of the town council. The planning board and the town planner act as advisory capacity to the town council in amending and adopting the ordinance. The zoning official and the zoning enforcement officer, George Medeiros, the building official, is the zoning official. He's responsible for interpretation of the zoning ordinance and answering questions, and then the zoning enforcement officer, which was me for a while, but it's now gone back to George, is responsible for enforcement. And then there, of course, is the zoning board of review, which is the body which issues variances and special use permits and handles appeals and the administration of the ordinance. So it does get reviewed. The ordinance does get reviewed from time to time. Where what has to happen is in the comprehensive plan, in the land use element of the comprehensive plan, there is the future land use map. And that is where we draw circles around this area we want this area we want that, this area we want this there.
Right. So the comprehensive plan is essentially, this is the way we want the town to look.
Right. And there is a map in the comprehensive plan, the future land use map, that this is what we want. And in theory, the zoning map should be identical to the future land use map. It takes, obviously, stuff gets rezoned, and it gets muddied from time to time, and it's got to be readjusted and brought back in place again. So
the comprehensive plan is also approved by the town council.
Yes.
It all kind of ends up on the town council's plate to adjudicate these things. It would seem very simple for somebody to say, okay, I want to come in, I see this lot over there, I'd like to build a house on it. So they go in and they check on the zoning map, and they say, okay, what is this plot zoned for? And then if it's zoned for something else, heavy industry or something, they wouldn't get permission to do that.
That's correct. Yeah,
so it all sounds very simple. So how does it get complicated?
Well, it gets complicated because people want to do things differently with the pieces of property, and there is obviously the simplicity of the zoning ordinance is in many ways kind of its downfall as well. It's sort of a one-size-fits-all kind of way of regulating land use, and clearly, and I'll talk about it in another session. I think there's all sorts of juicy details about variances and non-conforming and special use permits, and we'll talk about that. But the zoning ordinance, people want to do different things with property and than what the zoning will allow, and so there's ways to get around that.
Yeah, you know, part of the problem is also that a property may be zoned one way, a company comes in or somebody comes in and wants to do something in accordance with that zoning,
Mm-hmm.
and they run into a lot of resistance from neighbors, from abutters, and everybody else. And they end up not being able to do this because it all ends up going back up to the town council to get approved. So essentially, the zoning map is like not the final document.
Well, that's right. You know, that I say at the very end of my conclusion is the beauty of zoning is in its simplicity. The downside of zoning is that as much of the activity of zoning involves rezoning and variances and special use permits, and these are all decided by public/political bodies, and so you have this situation where you're designing or you're adjudicating, if you will, the use of private land, but it's by public bodies, and so
Yeah.
it is complicated and it is political, and there are winners and losers sometimes.
And attitudes change over
That's
time
right.
and things like that.
That's right. That's right. But and ideally, there's got to be some anchor. There's got to be some way that you can keep control of the situation. I think the zoning, as far as land use is concerned, the zoning ordinance is the way to go about it.
Several months ago, I read an article, and there was some kind of a local magazine, I can't remember the name of southeastern Massachusetts, perhaps, and it was talking about Freetown.
Mm-hmm.
And what they did is they essentially went in, and the council must have decided, we want to fix all this. We want to get the zoning to where we want it, and then we're just going to, and then people can just come in and know exactly what they can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't even know if that's possible. But is something like that a good idea every so many years to maybe somebody have a committee or something review the maps and say, okay, yeah, this still looks like what we want it to be?
Well, yeah, but
Or would that be your job?
Well, that is my job. There's a question here that I was asked to address about how does the town planner get involved. My job is I am responsible for maintaining the text and the map, the zoning map, and maintaining the text in the ordinance. And when there is a zoning change, it's my responsibility to go in and change the text to make sure it's up and running. But there is periodic review. Now, I think it would be a mistake to go in and just make a wholesale review of the zoning ordinance because it is a periodic review of the zoning ordinance because it is anchored so tightly to the comprehensive plan. And you can't do anything, you can't make any change in the zoning ordinance to make it inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. So I can see how...
And also state law.
And state law, exactly. So, and the enabling, the state enabling legislation, you can't have anything in there that's contrary. So if you were to sit down and start going through the zoning ordinance and say, oh, we want to change this, we want to change that, without any kind of a... I want to say an anchor, without any kind of basis for wanting to do so. It's got to be the other way around. You have to work on the comprehensive plan and the future
Sure.
land use map first. And as I said, over time they do diverge. There are things slip through, rezoning that slips through that for political reasons that we've seen that are frankly inconsistent with the comprehensive plan, and that kind of stuff has got to be adjusted over time.
Our comprehensive plan is being reviewed now,
Yes.
right? And are they
We're beginning.
are they usually good for 5 years once they're approved?
The new legislation, the state legislation, is a 10-year period, a 10-year update period. So what we're starting through now will be a 10-year update.
You know, I look in this whole process as one of these things of unintended consequences. The idea, it makes a lot of sense that we use a cookie cutter and go around and say, this light, you can put this, this, and this, and have good reasons for it. And then things change over time, and these things don't change, and it causes a problem,
yes,
a political and other problem.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So what are the things that zoning can't do?
Well, zoning is a terrible mechanism for dealing with neighborhood disputes, and you know, we just. I was the zoning enforcement officer for many years, and I have heard it all. And originally, zoning was set up to. The theory of zoning is that you're separating. By setting up districts, you're separating incompatible uses. My favorite example is, you know, a slaughterhouse next to a hospital, or a shopping mall near a residential district. But in practice, what has happened over time is that the core function of zoning is really to preserve property values, and not necessarily to separate incompatible uses. And I can't tell you how many times I have gotten telephone calls from people saying, my property values are being ruined because my neighbor's got a junk car in his driveway. And so, and the zoning, as hopefully we've tried to establish here, is that zoning really has to do with regulating land use. It doesn't have to do with making sure that the neighbor's got his lawn mowed, and that he doesn't have a junk car in his front yard, and that you know, he's making noise that's coming through my TV set, and so zoning really doesn't. There's other mechanisms. The town has other mechanisms for dealing with dealing with that sort of stuff, but zoning is just not it.
But you know, having said all this and looking at the maybe the downside or the difficult part of zoning, a logical person would say this is very logical. You try to separate the areas into areas that are compatible with what's already there. It seems so simple. You know, and there's really nothing wrong with simple. But you as the town planner, I guess, have to get involved when it starts to get hard. That's when your job.
The complexity of zoning is that it deals with human behavior, and
which is complicated.
Which is very complicated. Very complicated.
But, you know, Gary, I think what I'd like to do is have you back, and I'd love to talk about these other issues like planned unit developments and how those maybe help the process.
All the good stuff. This is
all the good stuff, because these are the ones that we see coming up, and a lot of people don't really understand how the system works. One of the problems that Rhode Island seems to have as a whole is when a business comes in, it's very difficult, they feel, to go through a lot of processes for trying to get permission to build on a certain property. And I think we need to talk about some of those things as links. So I'd like to ask you back for another time to perhaps talk about that.
I would love it. I could talk all day about this stuff. So.
Well, I bet. And I could ask you questions all day, too. But thank you very much for coming in today, and I hope we'll see you in the next week or two.
My pleasure.
And we'll be right back. Welcome back. I've got Town Administrator John Klimm with me this morning to talk a little bit about, give us a quick update on what's going on in the town. What's up, John?
There's always something going on in Portsmouth.
I know.
This week and next week are no exceptions. Next Tuesday, October 2nd, the council is having a special town council meeting, and they're holding it over at the high school auditorium. And the topic is pension reform. So it's an issue that is relevant not only in Portsmouth, but in all of the cities and towns in Rhode Island and nationally, actually. But we have had a pension committee working on a proposal for reform. They will be presenting their report to the town council. So that's Tuesday night, October 2nd, at the high school auditorium at 7 p.m. Last night I had an opportunity to travel to Warwick to attend the Rhode Island League of Cities and Towns annual dinner. And I was honored to be asked to sit on the executive board of that organization. I think it's really good, not only for me personally, since I'm relatively new to the state of Rhode Island, but also for the town of Portsmouth to find out what other communities are doing, to collaborate, to communicate regularly with both appointed and elected officials. So I really look forward over the next year to serve in that capacity.
That's great.
As well.
Congratulations.
Well,
I think
thank you.
that's super.
And of course, we are all working on our getting ready for Portsmouth's 375th anniversary.
Well, I hope you brought that up at this League of Cities and Towns.
I haven't, but I will.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I know, Doug, if people only knew how much time you've volunteered as the leader of the steering committee. I've been to several of the meetings and been so impressed, because at times there are things happening in a community that divides the community. And I think what is wonderful about the work for in honoring our 375th anniversary next year is really bringing people together. But what was the purpose of starting a steering committee?
I think you're right, and I think honestly, the real purpose. First, we looked around, and nobody seemed to have recognized that next year is the 375th anniversary of Portsmouth's founding. But then it struck me that what better thing to bring people together, to give them a common thing that we can all be proud of, than to start trying to celebrate the 375th. And that's really, even though we're hoping to have events, we're hoping to, get publicity both locally and also throughout the state, perhaps. I think the real purpose is to try to get everybody in Portsmouth involved in this thing. It's a fun thing, and you talk about my time and the time of our committee guys. Everybody that's been working with this thing has spent an inordinate amount of time, but I think that the thing we all believe is that, one, it's worthwhile. Every day I get up, I drive down to somewhere to get a cup of coffee or something, and I say, what a beautiful place this is. And I'm just amazed when I see all the political things that go on, the negativity in this town. And I'm hoping that the 375th will bring us all together, as you said. I think it's a great
So what progress have you made, and what efforts are ongoing?
We've made some progress. It's been slow. I think we've had about 4 meetings by now. It started out just a group of people. We call them a committee, a 375th committee, and we're gradually getting more people involved in this thing, which is what our effort is focused on right now. We're trying to establish a series of events throughout 2013, starting on the 1st of January, and then something every month all the way to the end in December. And some of these events we'd like to be, like weekend-long, several events in sort of clusters. One of them we hope to do is going to be around Louis Escobar's corn maze and fireworks, and we're hoping to partner with him to make this an even bigger thing for that particular holiday. But also we're looking at something towards the end, around this time of year, around September, October, to have a 375th parade. And we're talking with the Portsmouth High School. As you may or may not know, the homecoming parade that they do every year is this weekend coming up, and we'd like to partner with them and try to include, make it a larger sort of parade to celebrate Portsmouth's 375th, and so we're working on that. But we've got a lot of other things. I have people like Jim Garman, for example, a local historian, who's agreed to give essentially a lecture a month on the history of the island and the history of Portsmouth. We're hoping to start the first one of those on 7 March. That's the day the founders, signed the Portsmouth Compact, 7 March 1638. And so he's going to be giving these lectures to the public at the Portsmouth Free Library throughout the year. There are a lot of other sort of events that'll fit in there, genealogical programs. We're looking to try to do concerts and a bunch of other things.
Now, I know that all of you are volunteers, and you're giving a tremendous amount of time and effort to this, but I would assume that to be successful, you're going to have to raise some funds. And so what is your goal, and how is that working out? Yeah,
the fundraising, we have a fundraising vice chair of our steering committee, and the way we envisioned this was a steering committee would be 10 to 12 people, and we just kind of coordinate events going on, not actually run them ourselves. We could provide publicity, perhaps funds, trophies for a 3.75K race, for example, something like that, and otherwise support the other events that are going on. I think one of the things that we want to do, though, with any funds that are raised on this thing is at the end of the year, we want to provide a legacy to Portsmouth that will be useful going forward. And the idea that we've sort of come up with is funding a space or perhaps a room or something in the Portsmouth Free Library dedicated to the study of Portsmouth history, where we can bring together all the artifacts, all the amazing amount of material that is in people's homes, basically in damp basements and places like that, bring them into a temperature-controlled space and make them available for future historians of Portsmouth. We'd also like to digitize everything that we bring in there, or at least take pictures of them, so that they're available online. But we think that would be a great legacy for us to leave at the end of the year, and it'd be useful when whoever's around for the 400th of Portsmouth, they'll be able to look and see what we did.
So what have you found? Have residents been supportive?
Yeah, I think they've been generally supportive. I guess I'm constantly amazed, though, and disappointed when I see people like in Newport or somewhere else, and I find out they're from Portsmouth. The first question I ask, have you heard about the 375th? And a lot of answers I'm getting is, no, what 375th? So we have a lot more work to do in terms of publicity, I think. Right now, the key, though, is we need people to come in that even people that don't normally run events, to step up and say, hey, I'd be happy to organize as they say, a 3.75K race here in Portsmouth, perhaps a regatta, perhaps the Tiverton Yacht Club and some other folks get together and do something like that. We need people to come in and volunteer to do events. We'll help them, but we just aren't enough people to basically do everything. I have to say that people like Louis Escobar, the 4-H people, Gloria Schmidt, Jim Garman, a lot of people have been so helpful already. But now we need more people to come out and join us.
Is there a role for the local business community to play in this?
Absolutely. In addition, certainly this is a part of our fundraising effort is to generate sponsors for these larger events. For example, if we do something with Louis Escobar, we might want to try to find some sponsors so we can increase the fireworks display. If we do a parade, we might want to find sponsors of that. The businesses would get publicity and perhaps banners and things showing who donated the money. But also, everybody that donates to this 375th celebration fund will essentially be paying a part of that legacy going forward. So yes, businesses can support us that way. They can support us with in-kind contributions. For a parade, you need trucks. You need people to pull them and that kind of stuff. We love to get some antique cars. I was talking to the colonel who runs the Newport Artillery Brigade last night, as a matter of fact, and we have a lot of these kinds of things that we'd like to do.
So the fundamental question is, how do people get involved?
All they have to do is, we've been having meetings about every 2 weeks, and we kind of plan to continue that sequence on Thursdays at 5 o'clock at the library. Also, we have a website. It's www.portsmouthri375. Just about everything we do and everything we're doing and have done is listed on that website. It's a great website. So go there, send us an email. There are ways to contact anybody in the steering committee if they'd like to help. And just say, hey, I'd consider doing something or trying something like that. The point is, by the time we roll into next year, and we've only got a couple months left, we want to get everybody involved somehow. Either they come to the events or they run the events. But let's make this all of Portsmouth operation.
And we really do, as a community, have a lot to celebrate. We get caught in the day-to-day issues. You might not like a decision made here or there or whatever, but we are a beautiful community made up of terrific citizens. We have a lot to be thankful for.
Absolutely, I agree 100%. I'm afraid we're out of time already. It doesn't take long to get me going on the 375th, but thanks for joining us today, and we'll see you in the next edition of Portsmouth This Week.